You don't belong here. This is a boardroom, not a diversity theater. The words slice through the mahogany-paneled conference room like a blade through silk, each syllable dripping with the kind of casual cruelty that comes from absolute certainty in one's superiority. Angela Williams sits at the far end of the massive table, her fingers drumming once against the polished wood. A single tap that echoes in the suddenly silent space like a gunshot. The sound betrays nothing of the storm building inside her, the careful calculations running through her mind like lines of code. 12 white faces stare down at her from their leather thrones, their expressions a catalogue of privileged disdain. There's Morrison with his silver hair and cold blue eyes, Henderson nervously adjusting his gold cufflinks, Williams shuffling papers he hasn't actually read. The 30-story drop outside the floor-to-ceiling window seems less daunting than the hostility radiating from these men who've mistaken inherited position for earned authority. But what they don't know, what none of these men in their $5,000 suits and practiced arrogance understand, is that Angela has been planning this moment for exactly 847 days. Every slight documented, every microaggression recorded, every moment of casual discrimination cataloged with the precision of a federal prosecutor building an airtight case. The slight curve of her lips suggests devastating knowledge, a secret that could topple kingdoms built on assumptions and maintained through exclusion. The navy blazer she wears is deliberately understated, her jewelry minimal, her presence carefully calculated to let them underestimate her completely. She's learned that power hidden is power preserved, that competence concealed becomes competence amplified when the moment for revelation arrives. What would you do if they told you that you don't belong in your own company? Morrison leans back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight as he surveys what he believes is his kingdom. At 63, he's spent more years in boardrooms than Angela has been alive, or so his mathematics of superiority tell him. His fingers drum against his Mont Blanc pen, a nervous habit disguised as contemplation, while he calculates how to spin this conversation for maximum humiliation with minimum legal exposure. Angela, he continues, savoring each word like expensive wine, I think we all appreciate your enthusiasm for this role. Your passion is truly admirable, but perhaps it's time we discussed more realistic expectations about your position here, your trajectory, your fit with our organizational culture. The pause before fit carries the weight of centuries of exclusion, the coded language that transforms discrimination into performance management. He's perfected this speech over decades of similar conversations with people who dared to challenge the natural order of corporate hierarchy. The other board members nod in practiced synchronization, a chorus line of enablers who've mastered the choreography of institutional bias. CFO Henderson shifts in his seat, his discomfort with direct confrontation warring with his loyalty to established power structures. Secretary Williams continues his paper shuffling, the rustling providing soundtrack to systematic marginalization. You see, Angela, Henderson interjects, his voice carrying the patronizing tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a child, corporate finance requires a certain sophistication, years of experience, traditional preparation. We're not questioning your intelligence, of course, but leadership at this level demands proven expertise. They see what they expect to see, a 42-year-old black woman in conservative clothing, someone they've decided represents quotas rather than qualifications, diversity theater rather than genuine leadership capability. They don't see Dr. Angela Williams, Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School, Master of Business Administration from the Wharton School, former senior partner at McKinsey & Company, where she restructured 3 Fortune 500 corporations and saved over 12,000 jobs. Angela's breathing remains steady, controlled, deliberate, the rhythm of someone who's learned to regulate every micro-expression, every tell that might reveal the strategic game playing out behind carefully neutral features. She's studied these men for 2 years, learned their patterns, identified their weaknesses, mapped their networks of mutual protection and shared guilt. "I appreciate everyone's perspectives," Angela says finally, her voice carrying the kind of measured calm that comes from absolute certainty about the outcome of a contest others don't yet realize they're losing. The pause before perspectives hangs in the air like a sword suspended by silk threads. "I think we all want what's best for the company's future leadership." Morrison's smile doesn't reach his eyes, those cold blue orbs that have witnessed decades of similar conversations with similar outcomes. He's already drafting the press release in his mind. Another diversity hire who couldn't handle the pressure. Another example of why merit-based leadership serves everyone's interests. Exactly right, Angela. That's precisely what this is about. "What's best for the company," Morrison says, leaning forward with false sincerity. "And sometimes what's best requires difficult decisions. Sometimes it means acknowledging when someone might be better suited for a different role. A role that better matches their particular strengths." He doesn't notice Angela's pen moving across her legal pad with the precision of a court stenographer, documenting every word, every gesture, every moment of casual cruelty that will soon transform from personal humiliation into federal evidence. The morning sun casts long shadows across the boardroom as Angela arranges her materials with methodical precision. She's arrived 2 hours early, as has become her habit during these 847 days of strategic patience. The quiet time before others arrive has become sacred, moments when she can prepare for another day of systematic humiliation disguised as executive development. The contrast between her simple presence and the ostentatious displays of wealth surrounding her tells its own story. Italian leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars, crystal water glasses that catch the light like diamonds, oil paintings of long-dead white men whose primary qualification for immortalization was their ability to exclude others from their circles of power. Morrison enters at exactly 8 o'clock, his punctuality as rigid as his worldview. His surprise at finding her there flickers across his features before being masked by practiced politeness, the kind of surface courtesy that conceals deeper contempt. "Angela, you're early again. Such admirable dedication," he says, settling into his chair with the casual authority of someone who's never questioned his right to occupy space, to make decisions, to determine others' fates. The word dedication carries just enough emphasis to suggest it's misplaced effort, energy wasted by someone who fundamentally misunderstands the game being played. "Good morning, Richard," Angela responds, her voice warm and professional. "I thought we could discuss the transition timeline privately, get ahead of any potential complications." "I thought we could discuss the transition timeline privately," Morrison continues, his tone suggesting benevolent management of an unfortunate situation. "Given yesterday's board decision, I want to ensure we handle this professionally, with dignity for everyone involved. You understand, of course, that this isn't personal. It's simply about organizational effectiveness." Angela offers him coffee from the service she's prepared, her movements graceful and accommodating. It's a performance she's perfected over these long months, the grateful subordinate, the team player, the woman who knows her place and accepts it with grace. "Of course, Richard, I appreciate the board's thorough consideration of all available options," she says, pouring his coffee with steady hands. "Cream and 2 sugars, as usual. You always remember the details, Angela. That attention to detail will serve you well in your new role," Morrison says, accepting the coffee with the satisfaction of someone whose preferences are being catered to by their subordinate. She asks thoughtful questions about the transition process, takes careful notes on legal pads that will soon become evidence, appears completely cooperative with decisions that strip her of meaningful authority. "What timeline are we looking at for the transition?" Angela asks, her pen poised over her notepad. "I want to ensure all my current projects are transferred appropriately. We're thinking 60 days should be sufficient," Morrison replies. "That gives you time to wrap up your initiatives and transition to the Chief Diversity Officer role. Much better suited to your background, really. more aligned with your natural strengths. Morrison's relief is visible as he interprets her behavior as acceptance, even gratitude for his enlightened management of a delicate situation. He leans back in his chair, clearly pleased with how smoothly this conversation is proceeding. "I've scheduled a brief shareholder update for this afternoon," Angela mentions with carefully casual delivery, her tone suggesting routine transparency rather than strategic maneuvering. "Just standard communication protocols about the leadership changes. I've invited some key stakeholders to ensure everyone stays properly informed about governance decisions." Morrison nods approvingly, interpreting this as Angela facilitating his vision of smooth organizational transition. "Excellent thinking. Who have you invited?" "Oh, the usual suspects," Angela replies with a slight smile. "Dr. Warren from Global Holdings, Margaret Foster from Vanguard, a few other institutional investors. I thought transparency would be appreciated." He doesn't ask which other stakeholders, doesn't question why she's taking such initiative in announcing her own demotion, doesn't wonder why someone accepting defeat would invest effort in communication strategies. "That's very professional of you, Angela. Quite mature," he says, already planning how to spin the announcement for maximum positive impact. "I think our investors will appreciate your gracious handling of this transition. It speaks well of your character, your ability to put the company first." Angela smiles, the expression perfectly calibrated to suggest humble acceptance while concealing the steel beneath surface compliance. "Transparency is so important in effective governance, don't you think? Stakeholders deserve to know exactly what's happening, why decisions are made, who's responsible for organizational direction." The other board members arrive throughout the morning, each finding the atmosphere surprisingly cordial, professional, even friendly. Angela greets each one warmly, asks about families and weekend plans, discusses routine business matters with apparent normalcy. "Good morning, James," she says to Henderson as he enters. "How was your golf game yesterday?" "Terrible, as usual," Henderson laughs, his guard completely down. "I should stick to numbers instead of trying to hit a little white ball around." "Speaking of numbers," Angela says smoothly, "I've been reviewing our Q3 projections. Some interesting patterns emerging in the cash flow analysis." Her demeanor is so unchanged from previous meetings that several members begin to relax, interpreting her behavior as proof that yesterday's difficult decision was ultimately correct and well received. Henderson actually comments to Williams during a coffee break, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose prejudices have been validated by events. "She's being much more reasonable than I expected. Maybe she finally understands this transition is for the best, for her and for the company." "Always knew she was smart," Williams replies, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Sometimes it just takes people a while to see the bigger picture. They mistake strategic patience for submission, confuse competence for compliance, interpret professionalism as acceptance of their authority to determine her value and position. By noon, the entire board believes they've successfully managed a potentially explosive situation without backlash, drama, or legal complications. But Angela's cooperation is far too convenient to be genuine. The conference room begins filling at exactly 2 o'clock, but these aren't the faces Morrison expected to see at a routine transition announcement. Dr. Elizabeth Warren from Global Holdings Corporation, their parent company, enters first, her presence immediately shifting the room's energy from casual corporate meeting to something far more consequential. Her steel-gray hair is pulled back in a severe bun, her navy suit impeccable, her expression unreadable. She carries herself with the authority of someone who controls billions in assets and has the power to end careers with a quarterly report. He's followed by Margaret Foster from Vanguard Institutional, a woman in her 50s whose reputation for turning around underperforming companies precedes her into every room. Then representatives from CalPERS, Teachers' Retirement System, and 2 other major pension funds that collectively control 60% of the company's outstanding shares. These are people with the kind of power that makes board members nervous, stakeholders whose displeasure can end careers with a single phone call. Morrison's confusion deepens as more figures file in: corporate governance experts carrying thick portfolios, employment law specialists with federal agency credentials, financial analysts whose reports move markets and influence investment decisions. "Angela," he whispers urgently, leaning toward her with barely concealed panic. "What exactly is this meeting about? Who are all these people? This isn't what we discussed." "These are the stakeholders I mentioned," Angela replies calmly, her voice carrying no hint of the storm about to break. "I thought full transparency would be appreciated." Angela distributes a detailed agenda that spans 12 pages and goes far beyond simple leadership announcements. Items include corporate governance review and assessment, fiduciary responsibility evaluation, strategic realignment proposals, and stakeholder confidence analysis. The board members exchanged increasingly concerned glances as they realize they're not conducting a meeting, they're subjects of one. Dr. Warren addresses the room first, her voice carrying the authority of someone who controls billions in assets and has restructured dozens of corporations. "Good afternoon, everyone. We're here today to discuss some deeply concerning governance decisions and their potential impact on shareholder value, company reputation, and long-term organizational sustainability." Morrison attempts a smile. "Dr. Warren, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the purpose of today's meeting. Recent leadership restructuring decisions," Warren continues, consulting notes that suggest extensive preparation, "have raised serious questions about this board's stewardship capabilities, their understanding of modern governance principles, and their ability to make decisions that serve stakeholder interests rather than personal preferences." The word concerning lands like a physical blow. Morrison attempts to regain control of what he still believes is his meeting. He says, "If I may interrupt, Dr. Warren, I think Angela may have provided incomplete information about yesterday's board decision. We simply restructured responsibilities to better align with individual strengths and market needs." "Mr. Morrison," Warren replies, her tone suggesting she's reviewed extensive documentation, "we've conducted a thorough analysis of yesterday's proceedings. Our concerns extend far beyond a single decision to encompass patterns of governance that appear to violate both legal and fiduciary standards." Angela facilitates each question with professional courtesy, but her role has transformed from defendant to prosecutor, from subject to conductor of an orchestra playing a symphony of accountability. She's no longer explaining her position, she's orchestrating a systematic examination of the board's fitness to lead a public corporation. Margaret Foster leans forward, her reading glasses catching the afternoon light as she reviews documents that somehow already contain detailed analyses of recent board decisions, voting patterns, and governance compliance metrics. "The restructuring announced yesterday? Can you walk us through the stakeholder consultation process?" Foster asks, her tone suggesting she already knows the answer. "Because our preliminary analysis suggests significant procedural concerns and potential violations of established governance protocols." Henderson attempts to respond. "We followed all standard procedures for executive restructuring. The board voted after careful deliberation." "What specific criteria were used to evaluate leadership effectiveness?" Foster continues. "What performance metrics justified this restructuring? What documentation supports these conclusions?" The silence that follows is deafening. "Furthermore," Foster adds, consulting her notes, "can you explain why someone with Dr. Williams' qualifications would be considered unsuitable for executive leadership, while board members with significantly less relevant experience retain decision-making authority?" The board members realize they're being audited in real time by people who control their company's future, their personal reputations, and their ability to continue serving in corporate leadership roles. Morrison makes one final attempt to regain control. "I think perhaps we should schedule a more appropriate forum for these discussions. This was intended as a brief transition announcement." "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Warren responds with finality, "this is exactly the appropriate forum for governance concerns of this magnitude. The board's control is slipping away, one carefully planned question at a time. Corporate attorney James Walsh enters the room, carrying files marked with federal agency letterheads: Department of Labor, Securities and Exchange Commission, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. His presence elevates the stakes beyond internal governance disputes into the realm of potential criminal liability. Walsh is a man in his 50s with graying temples and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from years of handling high-stakes corporate litigation. His briefcase bears the seal of a major federal law firm known for prosecuting white-collar crime. Angela introduces him with devastating understatement. James Walsh, serving as advisory counsel for compliance matters and regulatory oversight issues. The description makes every board member's blood pressure spike as they process the implications of federal involvement in what they thought was a private corporate decision. "Good afternoon," Walsh says, setting his briefcase on the table with deliberate precision. "The Department of Labor and Securities and Exchange Commission have received formal complaints regarding potential discrimination, governance violations, and possible securities fraud." Morrison's face goes ashen. "I'm sorry, did you say securities fraud?" "The complaints allege systematic discrimination in leadership decisions, potential violations of fiduciary duty, and possible market manipulation through misleading governance communications." Walsh continues with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who's delivered similar news to dozens of corporate boards facing federal investigation. Henderson loosens his tie with shaking fingers. "This is preposterous. We've done nothing wrong." "Mr. Henderson," Walsh replies, opening his briefcase, "I have extensive documentation that suggests otherwise." Williams looks like he might vomit on the imported Italian leather. The casual mention of federal agencies transforms this from a corporate disagreement into a potential criminal matter, with consequences that extend far beyond employment status. Angela begins presenting evidence with the systematic precision of someone who spent 2 years building an ironclad case for federal prosecution. She activates a digital presentation system, the first slide showing a timeline spanning 24 months. "For the past 2 years," Angela begins, "I have documented systematic patterns of discrimination, governance failures, and potential securities violations. Hidden cameras captured discriminatory comments made in supposedly private conversations. The first audio clip plays Morrison's voice clearly. We need to be careful about the optics, but frankly, she's not C-suite material. Different background, different perspective. Clients expect a certain type of leadership. Email chains reveal coordinated efforts to marginalize her input, undermine her authority, and create documentation supporting her eventual removal." Angela displays email exchanges between board members discussing the Angela problem and strategies for managing the situation. Financial records show patterns of budget cuts specifically targeting her initiatives, while protecting projects led by white male executives. A detailed chart shows a 60% reduction in funding for diversity and inclusion programs, while marketing budgets increased by 40%. Performance evaluations reveal impossible standards applied exclusively to her work, while similar or inferior performance by others receives praise and promotion and recommendations. Side-by-side comparisons show Angela's initiatives outperforming others by significant margins while receiving negative assessments. But the smoking gun comes in audio form, a crystal-clear recording of Morrison and Henderson from 6 months ago. Their voices unmistakably identifiable as they discuss their strategy. "The key is documentation." Morrison's recorded voice fills the room. "We need to create a paper trail that shows performance issues, cultural fit problems. Make it about competence, not other factors." Henderson's voice responds, "Agreed. We ease her out gradually, make her so uncomfortable she'll resign on her own, saves us the legal complications of direct termination." Exactly. Death by 1,000 cuts. Eventually, she'll see the writing on the wall. The recording continues for several minutes, documenting their systematic plan to force Angela's resignation through calculated humiliation and professional sabotage. The question before us, Angela says, her voice carrying new authority as she addresses the room from the head of the conference table. Morrison's traditional seat, which she's claimed without ceremony or apology, isn't whether systematic discrimination occurred. The evidence makes that determination absolutely clear. The question, she continues, making eye contact with each board member in turn, is how we address systemic failures in leadership, governance, and basic human decency. How we transform an organization that has prioritized comfort over competence, familiarity over qualifications, bias over business excellence. Margaret Foster announces that institutional investors, controlling 60% of company shares, have conducted an emergency review and lost confidence in current board leadership. Based on our analysis, Foster states, we believe this board has violated its fiduciary duty to shareholders and created significant legal and financial risk for the corporation. Dr. Warren delivers Global Holdings' carefully considered ultimatum. We are prepared to exercise our majority ownership powers to force immediate restructuring if voluntary reforms are not implemented immediately. The nuclear option isn't just on the table. It's being armed, targeted, and prepared for deployment. Walsh presents a formal proposal backed by federal oversight authority. The choice is straightforward: immediate board restructuring, comprehensive governance reforms, independent monitoring, and ongoing compliance reporting to federal agencies. The alternative, he explains with legal precision, is criminal investigation for securities fraud, shareholder derivative litigation with personal liability for board members, and regulatory sanctions that could result in federal prosecution and potential prison sentences. Morrison finds his voice, though it trembles with panic. This is extortion. You can't threaten federal prosecution to force corporate changes, Mr. Morrison. Walsh replies calmly, I'm not threatening anything. I'm explaining the legal consequences of documented federal crimes. The evidence speaks for itself. The board faces complete annihilation or unconditional surrender, with no third option available. Angela stands and walks deliberately to the head of the conference table, her movements fluid and purposeful, carrying the authority of someone who's earned her position through competence rather than inherited it through connections. She doesn't ask permission or announce her intention. She simply takes her rightful place at the center of corporate power. The symbolic transformation is immediate and devastating. Morrison, displaced from his throne, looks physically smaller somehow, diminished by proximity to genuine authority and legitimate expertise. The other board members shift uncomfortably as the room's power dynamics realign around Angela's commanding presence. Before we proceed with any votes or decisions, Angela begins, her voice carrying a resonance that fills every corner of the room and seems to emanate from the very walls themselves. I believe complete transparency serves everyone's best interests. She opens a leather portfolio and removes a document embossed with official seals, the paper catching the afternoon light as she places it on the table where everyone can see the prestigious letterheads and legal certifications that validate her extraordinary qualifications. I am Dr. Angela Williams, Juris Doctor magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, Master of Business Administration with highest distinction from the Wharton School of Business. The credentials begin landing like physical blows, each one dismantling their carefully constructed narrative about diversity hires and affirmative action appointments. Former senior partner at McKinsey & Company, where I led the successful restructuring of 3 Fortune 500 corporations and saved over 12,000 jobs. I've consulted for the Federal Reserve on corporate governance standards and authored the Morrison-Williams Act on corporate governance reform. Henderson's mouth falls open. The Morrison-Williams Act? That's federal legislation. Yes, Richard, Angela says, looking directly at Morrison. It bears your name in what I now recognize as profound irony, considering your systematic violation of its core principles. I also served on President Biden's Business Advisory Council, published extensively on discrimination in corporate leadership structures in the Harvard Business Review, and hold board positions at 3 other Fortune 500 companies where I chair governance committees. They'd been condescending to one of the most qualified executives in corporate America, treating a recognized expert in corporate governance like a charity case requiring their benevolent management. But Angela isn't finished dismantling their assumptions about her background and capabilities. As of market close yesterday, she continues, placing a thick stack of financial documents on the table with the satisfaction of someone revealing a royal flush, I am also the largest individual shareholder of this corporation. The revelation hits the room like a physical force. Henderson's calculator fingers work frantically as he processes the implications, his face growing paler with each calculation. Morrison stares at the shareholding documents as if they might transform into something less threatening under intense scrutiny. That's impossible. We would have been notified of any major acquisitions. Over the past 18 months, Angela explains with surgical precision, through a carefully structured series of acquisitions coordinated with institutional partners and conducted in full compliance with SEC disclosure requirements, I have accumulated 23% of outstanding shares. Walsh interjects helpfully, all acquisitions were properly disclosed within federal requirements. The board's failure to monitor these filings represents another governance failure. Combined with Global Holdings' support and institutional investor backing, Angela controls effective majority ownership of the company they thought they ruled through tradition and mutual protection agreements. Tuesday month ago, Angela reveals, I began documenting systematic discrimination, governance failures, and potential securities violations with the thoroughness of a federal prosecutor building a case for criminal court. She activates another presentation, showing a comprehensive timeline of evidence collection, legal consultation, and strategic planning. Every slight was recorded. Every exclusion became evidence. Every moment of bias transformed into ammunition for comprehensive organizational reform. You weren't just discriminating against me. You were building the case for your own removal. Angela removes her conservative blazer, revealing a tailored power suit that commands attention rather than deflecting it. She allows her natural hair to fall from its deliberately modest styling, the visual transformation mirroring her revealed authority. I've been hiding my power, my credentials, my authority to make you comfortable with your own mediocrity, she says, her voice carrying steel wrapped in silk. I'm finished with that performance. This isn't about personal revenge, Angela continues, her voice carrying emotional weight for the first time in 2 years of careful control. My daughter will enter the workforce in 5 years. I refuse to allow her to inherit a corporate culture where competence is questioned because of skin color, where authority is challenged because of gender, where belonging remains conditional on making others comfortable with your diminished presence. The transformation is complete. Angela has evolved from victim to prosecutor to judge. Her authority no longer hidden behind strategic patience and careful accommodation. Power has found its rightful owner and will not be surrendered again. Morrison finds his voice first, though it carries none of its former commanding presence or casual authority. His hands shake slightly as he processes the magnitude of their miscalculation. Angela, Dr. Williams, we obviously had no idea about your extensive background or your significant position in the company. The words tumble out in a rush of panic and desperate damage control. The word position encompasses both her shareholding power and her true qualifications, acknowledgement arriving far too late to influence outcomes. But ignorance, Angela responds with devastating gentleness, was willful, strategic, and legally actionable. You chose not to investigate my credentials because they threatened your preferred narrative about diversity appointments and quota-based hiring. Henderson attempts to salvage something from the wreckage. If we had known about your background, your qualifications, obviously the conversation would have been different. Would it? Angela asks, her voice cutting through his rationalization. Because the discrimination wasn't based on lack of credentials. It was based on your assumptions about who deserves power, who belongs in leadership, who can be safely marginalized without consequences. One by one, board members begin offering resignations with the desperate urgency of people trying to escape a burning building. Henderson speaks first. Perhaps it would be best if I tendered my resignation, effective immediately. I think that would serve everyone's interests. Williams follows quickly. I'd like to explore retirement options. I've been considering stepping back from corporate responsibilities. Thompson, the youngest member who abstained from yesterday's discriminatory vote, approaches Angela directly. Dr. Williams, I want to apologize personally for not speaking up yesterday. I knew it was wrong, but I lacked the courage to oppose the group. I'd like to request consideration for the reformed board, if possible. I want to be part of the solution. Angela accepts resignations with professional dignity, avoiding triumphalism even in the moment of complete victory. Her response to Thompson is particularly measured. I appreciate your honesty, Michael. Learning to speak up against injustice is a skill that requires practice. Your abstention yesterday, while not ideal, showed moral awareness. We'll consider your request for continued service. She offers fair severance packages and positive professional references for those who cooperate fully with the transition process. Her magnanimity in victory contrasts sharply with their pettiness when wielding power over her. The interim leadership team, Angela announces, will represent the future of corporate governance. Accomplished executives who bring specific expertise in organizational reform, cultural transformation, and operational excellence. The vision extends beyond mere correction to complete reconstruction of corporate culture and business practices. Morrison makes one final attempt at damage control, his voice carrying the desperation of someone watching his world collapse. Angela, surely we can work together on some kind of compromise, partial reforms, gradual transition. There's no need for complete upheaval, but compromise requires equal power, and that equilibrium no longer exists in any meaningful form. Angela delivers her closing statement while looking directly at each former board member. Gentlemen, you told me I didn't belong in this boardroom. You were absolutely, completely correct. I belonged at the head of the table, transforming it into a space where everyone belongs, based on merit rather than connections. The silence that follows is the sound of an old order dying and a new one being born. Federal investigators arrive within hours to examine evidence with the thoroughness of archaeologists uncovering systematic crimes. The FBI's white-collar crime unit establishes a temporary office in the building, treating the case as a potential template for similar investigations nationwide. Morrison, Henderson, and 3 other former board members face personal liability that will exceed their combined net worth, their legal fees rapidly consuming assets they thought were protected by corporate shields and executive insurance policies. Within 24 hours, news of the boardroom revolution dominates financial media. Historic corporate governance reform transforms industry leadership. Headlines spread across Bloomberg, Reuters, and the Wall Street Journal. Rolling Stone, the company's stock experiences initial volatility, dropping 8% on uncertainty, before rebounding 15% as investors recognize the value of legitimate leadership and ethical governance. Angela's strategic approach becomes the template for corporate accountability movements across multiple industries. Law firms begin advertising services to help executives document discrimination. Business schools develop case studies examining her methods. Within a week, 12 other corporations face similar shareholder revolts as institutional investors demand governance reforms across their entire portfolios. The movement spreads like wildfire through corporate America. Morrison's personal collapse is swift and comprehensive. Legal fees consume his liquid assets within months. His country club membership is quietly revoked when other members complain about the negative publicity. His wife files for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and financial instability. The social consequences of corporate misconduct extend far beyond professional humiliation, reaching into every aspect of his previously privileged existence. Company employees previously afraid to report discrimination begin sharing their experiences through newly established anonymous channels that connect directly to federal oversight agencies. Human Resources receives dozens of complaints that were systematically suppressed under previous leadership, revealing a pattern of misconduct that extends throughout the organization. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look? Share your story below. The cultural transformation begins immediately and spreads organically, as employees realize they can speak truth to power, without fear of retaliation. Harvard Business Review publishes Angela's strategic framework for corporate reform in a special issue dedicated to governance innovation. She becomes the most requested speaker at leadership conferences, governance symposiums, and federal policy hearings. International business leaders invite Angela to advise on corporate governance reform initiatives spanning multiple continents. Her influence spreads beyond American corporations to policy discussions in European and Asian markets where similar problems require systematic solutions. The company's transformation becomes a beacon for progressive corporate leadership. Client relationships strengthen as partners recognize the value of ethical governance. New business opportunities emerge from organizations that prioritize integrity over traditional networks. Top talent begins applying for positions at all levels, attracted by progressive leadership and inclusive culture. The company transforms from struggling with retention to becoming an employer of choice across all demographic categories. Systemic change creates lasting legacy that extends far beyond individual victories. 6 months later, Angela testifies before Congress about corporate governance reform, her presence commanding the attention of senators from both parties. The hearing room is packed with corporate executives, legal scholars, and advocacy organizations who recognize this moment as historically significant. The C-SPAN cameras capture every word as Angela speaks with calm authority about how systemic discrimination operates in corporate America, presenting evidence-based solutions that address root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. Morrison sits in the gallery, a broken man facing multiple federal lawsuits and criminal investigation. His appearance has deteriorated markedly. Significant weight loss, graying complexion, the physical manifestation of someone whose entire world has collapsed. Senator Collins asks the question everyone wants answered. Dr. Williams, what motivated you to endure 2 years of systematic discrimination while building this case? Why not simply leave for another opportunity? Angela's response resonates far beyond the hearing room. Senator, this isn't about my personal experience specifically. It's about creating sustainable change for the next generation of leaders who shouldn't have to endure discrimination, document abuse, or sacrifice dignity for the chance to contribute their talents to American business. During the lunch break, Morrison approaches Angela in the marble hallway outside the hearing room. Security officers hover nearby, but she signals them to maintain distance, curious about what her former tormentor might say. I hope you're satisfied with what you've accomplished, he says, his voice carrying the bitterness of someone who's lost everything he valued. His legal troubles have aged him beyond his years, transforming him from commanding executive to cautionary tale. Angela responds with genuine sadness rather than triumphant satisfaction. I'm sorry it came to this, Richard, but satisfaction isn't the point. Change is the point. Prevention is the point. Ensuring this never happens to another qualified professional is the point. You destroyed my life, Morrison says, his voice breaking slightly. You destroyed your own life through choices you made over many years, Angela replies gently. I simply documented those choices and held you accountable for their consequences. Morrison's sentencing hearing draws national media attention, with reporters from major networks covering the conclusion of what's become known as the Boardroom Justice case. He receives 2 years in federal prison and $2,300,000 in fines for securities fraud and civil rights violations. His attorney's plea for leniency, based on changed perspective and recognition of past errors, fails to move the judge. Angela addresses the court during victim impact testimony, speaking not just about personal harm, but about the broader damage discrimination inflicts on organizations, communities, and society as a whole. Your Honor, she says, this case represents more than individual misconduct. It represents systemic failures that have prevented countless qualified professionals from contributing their talents to American business. The harm extends far beyond any single victim to encompass lost innovation, reduced competitiveness, and diminished economic growth. Her statement becomes required reading in business ethics courses and federal training programs addressing corporate discrimination. Federal investigation reveals that Morrison's pattern of discrimination extends back 15 years and affected dozens of employees whose careers were derailed, whose contributions were dismissed, whose potential was systematically suppressed. The scope of misconduct exceeds even Angela's comprehensive documentation, validating her decision to build such an extensive case before taking action. Morrison is permanently barred from serving on corporate boards or in executive positions at publicly traded companies. Henderson and Williams face similar restrictions that effectively end their careers in corporate leadership. Thompson, who publicly apologized and became an advocate for governance reform, receives consideration for continued service on the reformed board. Angela supports his rehabilitation efforts, recognizing the difference between active harm and passive complicity. Federal prosecutors use evidence from Angela's case to investigate similar violations at corporations nationwide. 12 executives are indicted on related charges within 6 months, creating a wave of accountability that transforms corporate behavior through deterrent effect. The ripple effects continue, expanding as more victims find courage to speak up. More investigators recognize patterns of misconduct, and more shareholders demand accountability from corporate leadership. Corporate misconduct faces consequences that extend far beyond individual careers, to encompass entire networks of complicity and systematic exclusion. 2 years after the boardroom revolution, Angela's influence on corporate America has fundamentally altered how business operates at the highest levels. The Corporate Accountability Act passes Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support, requiring public companies to demonstrate diverse leadership and equitable practices through measurable, auditable metrics. Corporate board diversity increases 340% across Fortune 500 companies within 18 months. Angela's strategic framework is adopted by governance consultants and becomes industry standard practice for identifying and addressing systemic bias before it reaches crisis levels. Business schools nationwide revise curricula to include bias recognition, inclusive leadership, and corporate social responsibility as core graduation requirements, rather than elective courses. Angela serves on curriculum advisory committees at Harvard, Wharton, and Stanford, ensuring the next generation of leaders understands both the moral and business cases for inclusive governance. "We're not just teaching about diversity," she explains to a gathering of business school deans. "We're teaching about sustainable competitive advantage through inclusive excellence." European Union regulators invite Angela to advise on corporate governance directives that will affect thousands of companies across multiple countries. Her approach influences policy development in 12 nations and becomes part of international business practice standards enforced through trade agreements. Angela establishes the Corporate Leadership Institute with an endowment of $50 million, providing strategic support and legal resources for underrepresented executives facing workplace discrimination. The institute intervenes in 47 cases during its first year, achieving an 83% success rate in securing systemic reforms rather than merely individual remedies. Research partnerships with academic institutions produce definitive data on discrimination patterns in corporate America. The studies document measurable bias in hiring, promotion, and leadership selection, providing empirical foundation for policy reforms and legal challenges. Technology companies adopt AI-powered tools developed by the Institute to identify discriminatory language in corporate communications and biased patterns in promotion decisions. The technology prevents discrimination proactively, rather than addressing it reactively after damage has occurred. Institutional investors create the Inclusive Governance Initiative, requiring portfolio companies to meet diversity and inclusion standards or face divestment. Over $2.3 trillion in assets participate in the movement, creating market-based incentives for corporate reform that exceed any regulatory requirement. Anonymous reporting systems modeled on Angela's documentation methods are implemented at major corporations nationwide. Employee protection for discrimination reporting increases significantly, with federal whistleblower protections extended to corporate governance violations. Companies report increased retention and promotion of diverse talent across all organizational levels. The pipeline problem that previously justified homogeneous leadership begins resolving as barriers are systematically identified and removed through data-driven approaches. Organizations with inclusive leadership consistently outperform homogeneous competitors in innovation metrics, employee satisfaction, and financial performance measures. Discrimination becomes a competitive disadvantage that shareholders and stakeholders actively oppose through investment decisions. Corporate culture surveys show dramatic improvements in psychological safety, belonging, and opportunity perception among underrepresented employees. The changes extend beyond compliance checkboxes to genuine cultural transformation that affects daily interactions and career trajectories. Where are you watching from, and what's one change you'll make to fight bias in your workplace? Angela's daughter begins her first internship at a Fortune 500 company where inclusive leadership is standard practice, not exceptional achievement. The workplace transformation is measurable and sustainable across generational change. "Mom," she says during their weekly phone call, "I've never experienced anything like what you described. Here, people are judged by their ideas and contributions. It's just normal." That normalcy represents the ultimate victory. A generation that doesn't have to fight the same battles, document the same discrimination, or prove the same fundamental humanity that previous generations endured. Systemic change creates lasting legacy that extends far beyond individual victories to transform entire institutions and cultural expectations. 5 years after that confrontation in the 30-story boardroom, Angela sits in her corner office as sunset paints the city in shades of gold and amber. The company has tripled in value under her leadership, appearing consistently on lists of most admired corporations and best places to work. Awards for governance excellence and community impact line the walls. Testament to transformation that extends far beyond profit margins to encompass fundamental changes in how business operates in American society. Angela reviews a letter from Maria Santos, a young Latina woman who just became CEO of a major telecommunications company. "Thank you for making it possible to lead authentically from day one," Maria writes in careful handwriting. "Because of your courage, I never had to hide my competence or apologize for my authority. I could focus on building rather than surviving." The letter represents hundreds of similar messages from leaders who inherited a corporate world transformed by Angela's strategic patience and systematic change. Her legacy lives in their success, their confidence, their ability to contribute without first proving their right to exist in professional spaces. Tomorrow brings Angela's final board meeting before transitioning to executive chairman, a role that will allow her to focus on the Corporate Leadership Institute and international governance reform initiatives that are spreading to dozens of countries. The boardroom that once symbolized exclusion now represents the gold standard for inclusive leadership development. Fortune 500 CEOs visit regularly to study the transformation, seeking to replicate similar changes in their own organizations. The conference room has been redesigned with round tables instead of hierarchical seating arrangements that reinforce power imbalances. Diverse portraits line the walls, leaders who broke barriers and built bridges across industries, generations, and continents. The space itself embodies the transformation from battlefield to sanctuary, from place of exclusion to center of inclusive excellence. Angela records a video message for the Institute's global network of emerging leaders. Real power isn't about defeating opponents. It's about transforming systems so future leaders never face the barriers you overcame. Victory isn't personal vindication. It's systemic change that outlasts individual careers and creates opportunities for generations. Her daughter calls to share news of her promotion to senior vice president at age 28, leading innovation initiatives at a technology company where her ideas are evaluated on merit rather than filtered through bias. "Thank you for changing the world so I could focus on changing my industry," she says. her voice carrying gratitude mixed with determination to continue the work of transformation. The personal and professional victories align perfectly, demonstrating that fighting for justice benefits not just individuals, but entire families, communities, and societies. Angela speaks directly to the camera about the choice every person faces when witnessing injustice. You can accept systems as they are, or you can use strategic patience and coordinated action to transform them fundamentally. That choice defines your legacy and determines what world you leave behind for those who follow. She announces her next venture, a global foundation focused on democratizing leadership opportunities across industries and continents. The work continues beyond corporate America to address systemic inequality wherever it exists, from technology to healthcare to education. Angela's wisdom has been tested by time and proven through measurable results. They told me I didn't belong in that boardroom. They were absolutely right. I belonged at the head of the table, transforming it into a space where everyone belongs, based on contribution rather than connections. Her story demonstrates that sustainable change requires strategic thinking, coalition building, and commitment to principles larger than personal vindication. Justice delayed can become justice amplified when patience serves strategy rather than resignation. Angela walks through her company's diverse, thriving workplace as employees of all backgrounds collaborate, innovate, and lead with confidence. Young executives seek mentorship not because they need protection from discrimination, but because they want to accelerate their positive impact on the world. The transformation is complete, sustainable, and replicable across industries and organizations willing to prioritize excellence over exclusion. The final image captures Angela silhouetted against the city skyline, a leader who transformed not just her own destiny but the very definition of corporate power in American business. Her legacy extends beyond individual success to systemic change that will shape generations of leaders who never knew a world where competence was questioned because of identity, where belonging was conditional on accommodation, where power required permission rather than performance. Belonging's power was the revolution that began with 12 words of casual cruelty has evolved into a movement that touches every corner of corporate America and continues spreading to organizations worldwide. Angela's strategic patience, comprehensive documentation, and commitment to systemic change created a blueprint for transformation that empowers others to fight injustice with intelligence, preparation, and unshakable determination. Power isn't about taking your seat at the table, it's about ensuring everyone has a chair.